1973. Sergeant Howie lands on an island just off the coast of Scotland to investigate the whereabouts of a little girl who's gone missing.
Her name is Rowan Morrison.
But when he lands on this island, there's something strange in the air. Why is it that nobody seems to know of this missing girl? Why do all the churches seem defaced and vandalised? Why are there strange naked rituals going on outside at night? And what's really about to happen on the impending May Day celebration? Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of folk horror and we explore the weird and wonderful world of Robin Hardy's The Wicker Man.
Oh God! Oh Jesus Christ!
Welcome back to the evolution of horror. My name is Mike, and as ever, I am your host. If you're joining us for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres across a number of weeks. We are currently in the midst of exploring the evolution of folk horror, and this is part 3, in which we are going to review the classic, the pinnacle of British folk horror, that absolute modern masterpiece, The Wicker Man. Now, we will be talking about The Wicker Man in all its spoilery glory, so please do, if you haven't seen it, go away and watch The Wicker Man first. It's really incredible. I'm of course not talking about that terrible Nicolas Cage remake. I'm talking about the original. Go away, watch it, enjoy it, embrace it, and then come back and listen to our discussion. Can't wait to get started. Before I introduce my guest, here are a few contact details. You can email us. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter @evolutionpod or on Facebook. That's facebook.com/evolutionofhorror. You can also follow us on Letterboxd, and that's where you can keep up to date with the ever-growing list of folk horror titles that we're going to be covering over the next several weeks. But let's get started. To join me to discuss all things The Wicker Man, it's her first time on the podcast. She's a huge fan of this film. I'm a huge fan of her. It is my great pleasure to welcome to the podcast Larushka Ivan-Zadeh. Larushka, hello.
Hello.
Hello. So lovely to have you here. Okay. First of all, just for people who don't know you, tell me a little bit about yourself and what you do.
I'm a film critic.
Mm-hmm.
I've been a film critic. I've been a professional film critic. This is quite scary, Mike, for nearly 20 years.
Oh my God, really?
Yes.
You don't look nearly old enough
Thank
for that,
you, Mike.
Larushka.
Thank you. And actually, the first film I ever reviewed was Blade 3. So I started off reviewing horror. It became a bit of a niche for me because my friend was the film editor at Metro newspaper, which is what I am now. Mm-hmm. And she was very high-minded, only like really reviewing sort of high-minded films and French art house cinema, whereas I really like horror movies. So I kind of slipped in on that niche.
As
so I saw a lot. Yeah, I was the genre girl, basically. So it's, I got to see everything.
Do you remember what you gave Blade Trinity? Because that was quite an unpopular one, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it's probably a 3.
A 3, yeah.
It's a good way to start off. Maybe that was a bit bland, but you're finding your feet as a critic. Let's start off with a 3.
Definitely. and at the time that franchise was popular, wasn't it? People probably wanted to know if it was worth seeing that one. That was a big
Blade
one.
was very good. I really enjoyed the Blade trilogy. Yeah.
I know. Yeah, it's a shame what happened.
I know when everyone goes, oh, there are no black superheroes. You're like, hello, what about Blade? Everyone always forgets about Blade.
I know. And is Blade based on a comic book kind of series as well?
Yeah,
it is. Yeah, that was. Oh, those were the days.
Anyway, we're already digressing.
I know. Already digressing. So, as you mentioned, you are a fan of kind of genre movies and that kind of thing. That was the next thing I was going to ask you. What's your relationship like with horror? How were you first introduced to horror?
I think my relationship with horror has changed on becoming a parent. Because before that, I was completely like, I'll see anything. Yeah. I'm really desensitized. I sort of enjoy the mechanics of the horror and, and appreciating it in a sort of chin-stroking genre type way.
Yes.
And after having children, anything would completely terrify me. And obviously a lot of horror is to do with grieving parents and children. Yes. And I remember when I'd see those films before, I'd be like, oh yeah, grieving parents and children. I'm like, oh, the children are in peril.
Yeah.
Completely like, oh, can't cope with anything like that. Now my children are getting slightly older, then it's becoming easier. They're now 3 and 6, so they're slightly out of the baby danger zone. But and also birth scenes. I think the beginning of the remake of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre has some woman giving a hideous birth scene. Anything that involves something like that. I guess it's the same with men and sort of castration or something.
Yes, exactly.
Any scenes involving genitals, but any scenes involving birth, now the most horrific thing I could possibly ever see.
It was the one good, I mean, this isn't very, real worldy, but it was the one terrifying moment, the one moment I liked in Prometheus where she has to kind of abort the alien baby herself out of her belly. I was like, oh, it was the most like excruciating sort of body horror
Yeah.
in that movie. Yeah, so good. What was the first? Do you remember what your first sort of intro into horror was, or what the first horror movie you saw?
I was thinking, I don't remember what. I do actually remember the first horror movie I saw, but I think the first scary moment was a moment I heard, because I remember my parents watching Jaws, and they wouldn't allow me to watch it, so I was sitting behind the telly, but all I could hear was duh,
Yeah.
duh, duh. And obviously that alone is terrifying, because as we know, like, sound is so
Yes.
crucial in horror. You can in fact just watch that, and it's worse because I'm probably imagining what Jaws is doing on screen with that music.
Yes,
And
definitely.
ever since then, I'm sure, like lots of people, you get in a pool as a child and you go underwater and you'd be like, and suddenly have this frenetic, there's definitely a shark behind me, I'm going to pelt to the other side of the pool moment.
Yeah, definitely. It is amazing that, isn't it? How it just gave everyone this, like, this was just this universal fear, basically,
Yeah.
of going into water and that kind of thing.
And I think it's actually continued my relationship with horror in that a lot of my favourite horrors aren't horrors. I mean, is Jaws a horror movie?
Yeah, well, I guess it is.
It's sort of. It's a monster movie.
It's a monster
thriller.
movie. It's in the vein of those kind of old monster movies and things like The Birds. And I would say it is, because I think fundamentally it's supposed to scare you, isn't it?
That's true.
I think.
That's true.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I know what you mean. It's kind of on the fringe. It's on the margins, which a little bit the Wicker Man that we're going to talk about is
definitely.
as well, I think. I think that is. I'm always interested in those types of movies as well. And obviously, there's been so much discussion about it in recent years with, post horror and all those kind of terms that people are coming up with, where it's like, is it horror? It's kind of not horror, But so we've been sort of talking the last couple of weeks about folk horror. What are your thoughts on folk horror? Because it's a weird one. It's quite a in some ways, compared to slashers or whatever, it's quite a kind of niche area of horror in a way, and also quite a hard one to define. What are your thoughts on sort of this area?
I absolutely love folk horror. I think because it is niche, it feels like this little sort of strange little world. It's the something nasty in the woodshed world, and it often feels very homegrown. I think that's one of the defining things about it. So it feels very British.
Yes, it does.
I think, obviously, all nations probably have some sort of strand of folk horror because everyone has a folk tradition. But the films that your podcast is probably concentrating on are, mainly that kind of weird Britishness. And I find that incredibly beguiling and intriguing.
It is, yeah. It is something. They don't really have the look or feel of a horror movie a lot of the time, but yet there's something creepy about them, isn't there? What is it about them that makes it scary?
Well, I was thinking about what sort of defines them, what makes them different. And I was thinking a lot of horror, particularly, you have a whole series on ghosts, is about the fear of the supernatural.
Yes.
And I think folk horror is about the fear of the natural. So it's about going back into nature. I think particularly all the people who make films are probably not like the most down sort of earthy types. And they're these city dwellers, and they suddenly go to the countryside. And it always reminds me of that line in Withnail and I where they go, "We came to the country by mistake." These kind of rabble townies who don't really know how to cope in this world. So you feel particularly a fish out of water often. It's someone from the city coming to the country, and they are confronted with all these rules that they don't quite understand, these different ways of being, this feeling of being powerless.
Yes.
Because you're used to be civilized as a human, you're master of all you survey. We've kind of, in a city, all nature has been sort of stuck under tarmac, and there's just a few kind of dusty trees left around to try and give us enough oxygen. But you go out to the country and suddenly you are this vulnerable creature, particularly if you're a city dweller, because you have no skills about how to survive at all.
Totally, yeah, exactly. I mean, we are obviously, we're sat right now in sort of North London, and how do you feel about? Do you enjoy going out to the countryside and seeing the rest of outside of London, the rest of England?
I do, but I do feel that kind of like, how do I negotiate this?
Yeah.
What do I do? What shoes do I wear? How do I? It's as simple as that. It's almost like touching mud.
Yes,
especially to city children, don't even know how to, like, they'll touch a worm, and that's like the ultimate horror for them.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of that kind of just scaredness of earth and power and wind and rain, just these elemental forces.
Definitely.
And folk horror is sort of like, I suppose it's the ways that all the rural folk in these films have found to sort of be with nature and tame it. But it's this force that's beyond our control. And
exactly. Yeah, totally. And it's something as well, it feels like, about a fear of something old or something that like should be long gone or dead or something,
old religion.
Old religions, exactly. Old traditions and old ways of life somehow are scary to us in some sort of way, aren't they? And again, it's that feeling that there are these little pockets around the country of people that may still live that way, or that's what these films suggest, isn't it? I wonder if it's got something to do as well with the fact that the UK, because obviously the Wicker Man is specifically set on an island. But I was thinking about it in terms of like, that folk horror is such a British subgenre, and we are an island that are sort of cut off, especially right now. Again, people were saying, is there some sort of connection between Brexit and the fact that folk horror is sort of back on the rise again, this kind of fear of sort of isolation and that kind of thing? Yeah,
definitely. I see what you mean about the isolation. I was saying in a less specific way, I think it's just that loss of national identity. So it kind of goes back to this era where, we were clinging closer to the soil, and we had all these traditions that bound us together as a community, and everyone had these pockets of, shared rules and societal norms. So
yes.
I think it also sort of slightly chimes in, doesn't it, with this with hipsterness and artisanness, because there's definitely been a huge craft revival over the last, 10, 15 years. Just things like knitting circles.
Yes.
Not that there's anything terrifying about those. Don't worry, everybody. But maybe there is. Maybe there's a horror film to be made about.
Oh, I reckon.
Deadly knitting circle.
Knitting needles.
But as we become more and more divorced from hands-on life, and we become these sort of weird corporate consumers. This idea of getting back in touch with it's the craft beer movement, the artisan coffee movement.
Oh my God.
But it all sort of taps in with that idea of just trying to get back something tangible, and I think folk horror has that appeal. Yeah,
definitely. Maybe it's got something to do with the internet and the digital age as well, and again, that kind of yearning for something tangible. It's this strange, and this is the thing that I think the films like The Wicker Man capture very well, is that it kind of celebrates that lifestyle, and then also is terrifying at the same time, which is what's quite nice about it. So what's your do you have a favourite horror movie?
Well, I think it's probably Wicker Man.
Amazing. Well, that was good. That was a good segue.
But it is, I mean, I think I'd say it's more than it's my favourite horror movie. It's just one of my favourite movies. And I would contest, is it a horror movie? Which I'm sure we'll be talking about much more.
Yeah.
Because I remember not seeing it, in that I remember it had this huge reputation. So when I was growing up, this was before the internet, Mike.
Oh my God, what?
I know.
Yeah.
And my Bible was like Time Out. So every week they had the listings in Time Out, and I'd go in a complete film geeky way down all the films. They'd list every film that was in London.
Yes.
All the titles of the film, and I'd cross off all the ones that I'd seen. But I wasn't allowed to see The Wicker Man because I was an 18, and I wasn't allowed to go and see that if it came up in rep. But whenever it would have the little reviews, it'd be like, this is the most terrifying movie ever. And it would be on all these late night screenings at places like the Scala. And so I was like, oh my goodness, what is this film? And then when you kind of come and see it, you sort of go, oh, it's
really fun.
Yeah, exactly. This isn't terrifying. I mean, it's very eerie, it's very unsettling, but it's not I would not say it's a terrifying horror movie.
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because I love it. I think it would be in my sort of top 5 or top 10 movies and horror movies as well. And it's something that I can keep revisiting. And I think because it's just so much fun to watch, and there's so many elements of it that you can enjoy, not just that it's trying to hit you with scares every 10 minutes, which sometimes you know the power sort of diminishes, doesn't it, with rewatches with movies like that, whereas with this it never does. But every time I think, oh, this is great fun, and every time it still manages to get me at the end though, where I do find myself sort of gripping the side of my seat by that by that last sort of few minutes. It still sort of brilliantly sort of sneaks up on me every time.
I think the other thing to say about it is it's a true one-off.
Yes,
I have now seen literally thousands of films by being a professional film critic over the many, many years that I've been doing it, and it still remains this kind of complete oddity and this complete one-off film. It's kind of a genre in its own self.
It really is. Nothing else is like it. And even the remake, which we won't talk about, and the sequel, and the sequel, which we also won't talk about, is that even they just
the lightning doesn't strike twice.
Yeah, nothing comes close somehow to capturing what they captured. And obviously it's influenced a lot of movies, and even when you look at things like Ben Wheatley's Kill List and
Ben Wheatley more than anyone, I'd say,
yes,
definitely by the Wicker Man.
But it is still, you're totally right, it is something so unique about it. You can't describe it even, until somebody's seen it. They don't really understand what they're in for.
It was upon a Lammas night when corn rigs are bonny.
So it starts with a seaplane going over sea, and it sort of goes over this island, and it sees this strange island that seems to be full of fruits and flowers and fecundity. And the seaplane lands, and Sergeant Howie arrives, who's played by Edward Woodward, and he says that he's come. He meets the grumpy locals and says, "I have come to investigate a missing child."
Yes.
And they go, "Oh, a missing child is always trouble," they say. And you're like, okay, we've seen this film a million times before. It's like the policeman comes, there's something happened, it's always a sort of victim that's usually a child or something like that. And he says, I want to go and investigate what's happening because I've had a letter that's been sent to me that says that I've got to come and investigate this child. And it's Rowan Morrison that's gone missing. And they go, oh, yes, you mean her mother May. She's up by the post office. So the inspector goes to investigate that and then starts this merry dance that he's led on by the locals who go, no, we're not missing a daughter. And then it's like, but are you missing a daughter? There seem to be some photographs of this child. Yeah. Are there photographs of this child? And what impedes his progress more than anything investigating this is that he's told that the island belongs to Lord Summerisle and that strangers aren't welcome here and that it abides by its own rules.
Yes.
So he's got to clear everything he does by Lord Summerisle, who's played by the wonderful Christopher Lee, of course.
Amazing, yeah.
And the more that he investigates this island, the more Sergeant Howie, who's a devout Christian, comes up against the rollicking paganism of this island, which seems to have copulating couples at every corner. He's led a merry dance all over this island. There's no way of getting off this island because it's a seaplane on and off. The film was made it's released in 1973, so it's not like he's going to have much way of communicating with the mainland.
No, totally cut off. Yeah.
And in the end, he infiltrates the Carnival of Midsummer Evening by dressing up as Punch.
Yes, the Fool.
The Fool. He dresses up as the Fool and is led a merry dance more and more and more. And at the end of this dance, Lord Summerisle, played by Christopher Lee, says, "And now for our more dreadful sacrifice." They drag Edward Woodward, kicking, screaming, and slightly overacting up the hill.
It's wonderful.
Into this terrifying-looking, huge wicker structure, which is chock full of animals, screaming and bleating away. And they set fire to it, and all the villagers circle this burning Wicker Man, making some sort of horrible chanting sound. And as he's in it, in the Wicker Man, as it flames away, Edward Woodward's going, "Oh Lord, Jesus Christ, save me!" And you're like, "Well, will God save him, or will the pagans, will the pagans conquer?" And God does not save him. Yeah, he is not redeemed. Well, he might be going up to heaven, but he is certainly no more on this earth.
Not that we see. Yeah,
not that we see. And it ends with the Wicker Man collapsing and Edward Woodward being burnt alive hideously.
Yeah. It is incredible. I remember the first time watching it and thinking, okay, at what point is somebody gonna arrive and save him at the very last minute or something? And it just keeps going and keeps going, and then the credits roll, and you're like, "Oh fucking hell!" It's just like Jesus.
Oh, Jesus Christ!
Jesus Christ! Yeah, I mean, it's an incredibly powerful sort of bleak ending, isn't it, to an otherwise jovial, quite fun horror movie in a way. So what was so you said that this is your favourite horror movie and one of your favourite ever movies. Why is that? What do you love about this movie?
I think one of the key things I love about this movie is the sense of place and location and the texture of the film itself. It's set on this, the thing is in Dumfries and Galloway.
Yes.
And it's meant to be in the middle of summer. It's set in midsummer, but they had to shoot it for financial reasons in November. So everyone was absolutely bloody freezing.
Oh my God.
And they had to put ice cubes in people's mouths to stop their breath showing, and they're all like goose pimples. They're wearing their kind of midsummer shifts. But more than that, it just has that feeling of anyone who's been to a Scottish island will still feel it has this kind of timeless feel of you get off the boat and you're just in this other world.
Yes, you're stepping into the past. Yeah.
You're stepping into the past and something, slightly different tradition, and you're on the back foot. You may feel superior, but you're on the back foot to this. And I don't think this film, it just couldn't have been made if it had been a studio film. It has to have that authenticity of location.
Yeah, definitely.
And authenticity of locals. Because they employed mainly, all the extras are just people around.
Yes.
And that really gives a different texture to the film. It's not full of like RADA extras sort of walking around pretending to be locals. They're just normal people.
That's it. But we talked about that a lot. We use the word authentic a lot, talking about The Witchfinder General and Blood on Satan's Claw as well. The way that these movies, they are all shot on location. It is, the landscapes, the soil, everything about it, the people. It doesn't feel like, just to the side of frame there might be a dressing room or a trailer. It feels like you're there living in this place kind of thing. That's the thing.
And the set dressing by Seamus Flannery is amazing. So one of my favourite scenes, I think you were saying you like this too, is when Sergeant Howie goes into the sweet shop.
Yes, love it.
Which is one of the first scenes, and you look through the window of the sweet shop and everything is like this strange pagan version of...
Yes.
There's not a Cadbury bar in sight.
Yes.
There's like a chocolate hare and a strange coffin full of gobstoppers and all these weird dolls made of marzipan, naked dolls, and it's,
lots of nakedness. And
yes,
all that
exactly.
Kind of
and you're like, what is this place? And that more than anything gives the feeling of this place.
Yeah.
And what I think I particularly love about the Wicker Man is it just feels like normal life but slightly askew. And I think it just captures that feeling of alienation that often you can always feel about if you feel like you're a slight outsider or something like that. And I wondered if it sort of chimed with me particularly because although I sound incredibly British, and I am, my parents weren't born in this country, so I'm kind of like a first generation immigrant. And I think there's slightly that feeling of you grow up in a society where you're not quite sure of all the rules and rituals. You're slightly outside it, and I think it manages to capture that really well. I think that's something I probably personally respond to.
Definitely, yeah. And you're right. It's that feeling of something is just off, because actually, through again the first kind of, I suppose there's that initial moment when they are a bit like, what are you doing here? You know, trespassing on our island sort of thing when he first lands in the plane. But and other than that, the locals are actually kind of friendly, and they all seem they're all just kind of quirky. But they're all actually quite nice and
yeah, they have that initial kind of American Werewolf in London moment of the pub where, you know, the strangers come into the pub and it's like, crap, you know, needle across record, look at them, what's going on, big stare. Yeah, they have that moment. They have that moment actually in a pub here, the Green Man. But yeah, it's the way that they every area of life on the island is made strange. And you see that there's a school scene where you see Sergeant Howie going to the school, and there's the school teacher played by Diana Cilento.
It is the image of the penis, which is venerated in religions such as ours, as symbolizing the generative force in nature.
All the little girls are at their desks and they're learning like about the phallic symbol.
Yeah,
she's saying, she's got a wonderful old blackboard and she's saying, this is the hagstone, this is the toadstone. And then she opens up this girl's desk, and in the desk there's a beetle on there's empty desk with one nail in the middle, and tied to the nail on a piece of string is a beetle just going round and round.
And getting closer to the middle.
Yes, exactly. Which is apparently a real kind of life witch's charm, because they read a lot about all the witchcraft and paganism. These are all based on real things. And I think that's the other thing about all these folklore things. These are things that happened often. This is real stuff. This isn't just like hokum that people have invented. This is, people lived this and they really believed, or at least they lived in a society where that was the convention, and so they were brought up on these weird rules.
Definitely.
And we're all brought up on weird rules. It's just
exactly. It will always seem weird to another generation.
Or another culture will seem very strange.
Definitely. And I suppose what's interesting as well, compared to the two that we talked about last week that were very much set, period pieces, whereas this is, they never really specify, but I'm assuming it is set in the contemporary of the time when it was made. And I think we've got Sergeant Howie as this kind of vessel of like, okay, he's from sort of modern civilization.
The mainland.
Although, albeit very, very pious Christian. But other than that, he's kind of our sort of conduit into this, what is this crazy world that he's stepping into sort of thing.
I think that's why I like the Wicker Man definitely more than Blood and Satan's Claw and Fine General. I know they're sort of always now trioed together.
Yes.
But yeah, it's that feeling it's almost a today's society. And it's interesting because the cut that most people see is the one that was released, and in the original film it started on the mainland with Sergeant Howie coming in, and he lands on the mainland, and his first line is "Cut your hair, McTaggart," or something to the long-haired. Was 1972, I suppose it would have been shot. So the kind of long-haired like slacker police officer. And there's a whole scene on the mainland, and it feels much more dated because suddenly you're in 1970s Britain.
Yes, definitely.
And the wonderful thing about The Wicker Man as it stands, and I know it's controversial because it's not the director's cut, but I do prefer it, is when it actually does start with the plane going to the island, because then the whole film exists in its own time and space, and that's why it doesn't date, because it just exists in this universe. Exactly,
it's true. Other than the fact that maybe the character might have a mobile phone on him, there would be no difference if you said it now. This island could still be set, of the past almost, because it's so isolated. It could be
any time in the 20th century.
Definitely. Yeah, it's wonderful.
You're liars. You are despicable little liars. Rowan Morrison is a schoolmate of yours, isn't she? And that is her desk, isn't it? Well, isn't it?
I think you ought to know.
And you are the biggest liar of all.
What do you think of Edward Woodward's performance then in this as Sergeant Howie?
I think he's terrific actually in this film, and you don't sort of pay enough attention to him because he's the straight man in this film to Christopher Lee's flamboyant and wonderful Lord Summerisle. And Edward Woodward at this point, he was just a big TV star, so they got him in because he was in this show called Callum where he plays again a secret agent, and then of course after that he played the Equalizer. So he's always playing these kind of secret agent cop types clearly, but he has just a real intensity to him. You believe in his mission, and he doesn't overplay the Christianity. He's just quite terse and quite dogged, and I think, quite believable. It's quite
He
and
is
very
believable.
rigid. I've noticed he has this real style. When I was watching it again, he doesn't really move his head a lot in it. I think
That's it.
He's literally uptight. But yeah, he's never. I think he could have played it in a much more kind of pantomime-ish way, and he doesn't. I think it's quite a masterful performance, really. Actually.
It is actually. It's like a perfect. He sort of walks a sort of fine line, I think, throughout the whole thing of being like he could be. A bit of an extreme character in his sort of Christianity, his piousness, and all of that kind of thing. But yeah,
he is largely unsympathetic. I mean, he's a very unsympathetic hero.
He's not much fun, is he? He's not the sort of person
He's
you'd want
no
to sit
fun
in the
at
pub
all.
with at all. You'd much rather hang out with some of these other characters on the island in
Yeah.
some ways.
But yet it always sort of brings it back to the fact that, he is investigating this missing child. He's kind of like going, these people could all be mad child killers.
Yes.
So you have to kind of slightly side with him going in. And
It's
that's why the
true.
film is really brilliant, because it kind of plays with this, with your sympathies of,
Yeah.
we can't quite write him off as just being this no fun, uptight, Christian copper, as he's called.
Yeah, exactly. But do you think, what stance do you think this movie takes on kind of religion, Christianity, paganism? Because obviously it ends badly for the Christian. But for the bulk of it, it feels like I think it's quite celebratory of this lifestyle in a weird way as well.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting because it should be a kind of, it's a counterculture movie in a sense. And definitely you think 1970s, it's all like free love and hippies and all that. But the genius is of setting it in on this timeless Scottish island, because it could have just been like all these hippies shagging each other in the grass, and that would have so dated it, like toking on joints and having their guitars out, and that would have been a very different movie. And I guess there is a sort of strand of that in Lord Summerisle's outfit at the end. There's this bit where Christopher Lee turns from being this very patriarchal tweedy laird of the island, and he wears this remarkable kind of outfit which looks like a sort of Cher drag wig and white makeup, and then this kind of like groovy purple caftan, and it really could be like we're just in Glastonbury now, hanging out.
It's like the Sergeant Pepper cover or something.
It is. It's quite like that, and you think this is the only moment where he could slightly go into silly, but he doesn't.
Yes.
It's amazing. But yeah, that would have been the thing that could have dated it. And it does respond to that counterculture thing, but it doesn't.
Yeah, it's so clever, and it's what the best genre movies and horror movies do, is that they kind of they put all of that stuff, but in an alien kind of genre context, so that it doesn't date it.
Yeah.
Yes,
but also you mentioned Satanism and things like Rosemary's Baby. The Wicker Man is based. I shouldn't say, I don't know. It was drawn from a book called Ritual by David Pinner, and in the book, which I reread recently. It's very similar, though Anthony Shaffer, the writer of The Wicker Man, is like, oh, no, it's not really. But the idea was that it was meant to be based on this book. And in this book, you have a policeman who goes to investigate a child who's been found dead under an oak tree in a village. Oh. And on the oak tree have been pinned some garlic flowers and a bat's wings and a monkey head. So there's obviously some ritual witchcraft going on. So he's gone to investigate the witchcraft in this village. But it has a very much more overt satanic bent to it. So when he goes to investigate the Lord of the Manor's house, instead of finding it full of like loads of Scottish flags and tartan like Lord Summerisle's house is, it has a temple which has a huge like cloven hoofed Lucifer in it, and a black altar and pentangles and all that kind of stuff, which you do not get in this, because it's about paganism and not Satanism. So it's not contrasting in the same way. And the thing that makes it so interesting, I think, The Wicker Man, and another reason that it's so fantastic, is that, say this is released 1973, same year as The Exorcist comes out. Exorcist, all about good, evil.
Good
you know
versus
where
evil.
you stand.
Absolutely.
Right? The devil is in her in The Exorcist. We can see that because her head's revolving around and she's spitting out soup.
Exactly.
But in The Wicker Man, it's much, much more difficult to put your finger on, and that's very deliberate because it's all about sacrifice, and it's written by this brilliant writer Anthony Sheffer, who did Frenzy and Sleuth. I mean, he's a really top writer. In fact, when I was looking at the credits last night, I saw that when The Wicker Man comes up on the screen, it says Anthony Sheffer's The Wicker Man. This was his film. It's his film much more than anyone else's. He was the big star of this film, as it were. And what he was interested in, was taking the sort of ideas of good and evil that you see in every horror genre, and instead of kind of flipping that and investigating it.
Yes.
And there's that. There's a sequence where Lord Summerisle and Sergeant Howie have that first discussion, their first kind of cat and mouse discussion. Lord Summerisle is brilliant. It's the first meeting that they have, and so he catches Sergeant Howie looking out the window at the naked girls leaping over a flame, which Sergeant Howie seems quite interested in as he's licking his lips, looking at them. And instead of going, "Oi, what? I've caught you in the act," he kind of goes,
Just the sight of the young people refreshes you.
No, sir. It does not refresh me.
And
Yes.
and this means that Sergeant Harry sort of blusters, going, "Oh, what's all this? You've got fake biology, fake religion." I won't do the Scottish accent. "Have these children never heard of Jesus?" And Lord Summerisle delivers the wonderful line, "Himself the son of a virgin, impregnated by a ghost."
Exactly. I love that. And it's basically saying, well, whatever, all religion could be taken as ridiculous in different ways, couldn't it? That's the thing.
And even Lord Summerisle, you think, well, he's the laird of this island, he's the high priest of this cult, as it were. But even he kind of goes, well, I don't know if I believe in this. He said that my grandfather just invented all this, or sort of tapped into the local knowledge when he came here, and sort of made himself the god, the high priest of this existing cult, in order just to get the locals on side and try and appease them and suggest that the weather would be better. Yeah. So he was just saying, this is a social construct to keep the workers happy.
Definitely. And there's this idea as well, the outrage that they've kind of sort of defaced this church and turned it into this kind of pagan temple or whatever. And it was interesting. I was watching a film recently. I don't know if you've seen the Borderlands from like 2013. It's like a kind of found footagey folk horror. It's actually quite good. But there's this whole conversation they have about how thousands of years ago or however long ago, Britain was filled with all these kind of pagan churches or places of worship, and then Christianity just came and basically built their churches on top of it, and came in. And
Easter, isn't it? Like the celebration, they just took the existing pagan festivals and the dates of them and just incorporated them.
Converted them to something more godly. Exactly. So it's like it's that kind of back and forth of kind of pagan. These pagans reclaiming, I suppose, what was originally theirs.
Yeah, and but not completely. So they can't stomp it out. So it becomes this weird hybrid in people's minds and in the energy of the different cultures sort of merging together, and slightly bits attached to each other, but other bits kind of are in conflict.
Yes, I love that line as well. And Chris, they ask, he says, what of God and blah blah blah, and Chris Philly just goes, he had his chance, he blew it or something.
I think he says, in whatever this contemporary parlance or something. Yes, he blew it.
It's brilliant.
There was a tinker lived of late who walked the streets of Rye.
Let's talk. I wanted to ask you about the incredible music as well, because music is such a big part of this film, isn't it? I mean, it's almost, I've heard a lot of people call it a musical, because it does suddenly, it sort of breaks away into these little set pieces where you'll just see people sing for a few minutes, before it then carries on.
It's this kind of young experimental composer called Paul Giovanni who did the music, and he'd never done the soundtrack for a film before, and it was very much based on existing folk songs. They went to Cecil Sharp House in London, which is kind of a repository of all the folk music, and they drew on that to create, because a lot of it is music, but a lot of it has lyrics in, which are very beguiling.
Yeah, wonderful.
And there's something about folk music that can be very eerie, and often the things that they're talking about are very dark.
Yes.
And very disturbing.
Take the flame inside you, burn and burn below. Fire seed and fire feed and make the baby grow.
I was listening back to your concluding episode of the Ghost podcast, and you just did that. You did a little excerpt again from the Innocents, where they have Beneath the Weeping Willow, and I was just like, hearing that just made me completely terrified for the whole day.
It's an incredibly creepy bit of music, isn't it? I love it. Yeah, and again, the music in this has that kind of weird balance of it's kind of lovely and it's fun and it's
it's upbeat often. It's like
upbeat,
dun, dun, dun,
and then also there is something inherently quite unnerving about it at the same time. But you've got some of these songs that are just like the landlord's daughter one and that kind of thing, which is just hilarious.
Much has been said of the strumpets of yore, of wenches and bawdy house queens by the score. But I sing of the baggage that we all adore, the landlord's daughter.
But they're kind of they're conduits, aren't they, for all the kind of dark stuff about sex and death that's going around. It's often about some girl who's been taken away, usually raped by a tree or something like that. That's going on.
I know. It's really interesting. What do you think of the way that the kind of gender roles are played in this? Because I've heard people argue that it's quite progressive and that it's almost kind of matriarchal in the world that it kind of depicts and that kind of thing. But then also you've got the landlord's daughter who just kind of gets naked and that's sort of her role as well. I mean, I don't know.
In the remake. Not that we're talking about the remake.
Yeah.
I hate the remake.
Yes.
But they took that as they made the island. It's now, instead of Lord Summerisle, it's about a matriarchy on the island. So it's all run by women and men are completely subjugated. Look, no fun, that island. I was like, oh, that island looks rubbish. Much rather be on Lord Summerisle's island.
Exactly.
There is a kind of idea that they're sacrificing this sacrifice to the Wicker Man. They're burning it to the sun goddess.
Yes.
So the ultimate power is meant to be the woman.
Yes.
And it's very much a patriarchal society on the island. I mean, there's no doubt that Christopher Lee is the boss of that island, is there? And you've got characters like Ingrid Pitt, whose character is actually, I think in the credits, nymphomaniac librarian. That's what she's called.
Yeah.
She's definitely of its era.
Yes.
And the landlord's daughter is played by Britt Ekland because she's a sexy Swede. And this was the time, I mean, this is an era where the number one film at the box office in Britain was Confessions of a Window Cleaner. So we're talking a quite unreconstructed time sexually, I think, in terms of sexual politics.
Yes.
So yeah, there is that. And of course, the famous dance where Britt Ekland had her bum double in this dance. She's naked dancing next door to kind of entrance Sergeant Howie.
Yes.
Beating on the wall of his room. So he's in one room praying in his very beige pajamas, and she's naked and thrumming on the other side of the wall, trying to get him to come next door and lose his virginity with her.
Hey ho, who is there?
Which is one of the key moments of the entire film. And that, you're just like, yeah, okay, it's a sexy Swedish lady with her boobs out.
Yes,
really,
yes.
it's what we're talking here. But actually, in the original director's cut, which is cut from the film, there's an earlier scene where you see Lord Summerisle coming underneath the window with this young boy called Ash Buchanan, and he knocks on the window in a kind of ritualized way, and Willow, played by Britt Ekland, looks out the window and he hails her as Aphrodite.
Yeah, it is like she's this goddess, isn't she?
She's this goddess, and she's also this teacher, so she deflowers the young man to the tune of Gently Johnny, which is a beautiful interlude in the film, and the film sort of suddenly quiets down, and in the pub, which is previously in just one scene earlier been all like raucous and landlord's daughter, suddenly goes all quiet, and everyone's sort of just sitting around playing on their lovely plastic 1970s descant recorders. I love this.
I love it. It's such a wonderful scene. I'm shocked that it was cut from the original theatrical release. That whole Gently Johnny song isn't in it, is it?
No, it's not in it.
I put my hand on her knee and she says, do you want to see? I put my hand.
And then then it sort of cuts to the exterior where you see Lord Summerisle looking fondly at two snails copulating in slow motion on a leaf. Which I love that bit as well.
It's brilliant. I love that whole section. I wonder why they cut it. I mean, the only thing I wonder is that, that would be the first appearance of Lord Summerisle, wouldn't it? And I wonder if it's better and more powerful to have the first time we see him when we go to his big manor, and it's, a little bit more, I don't know, dramatically, it sort of means more than the first time you see him. He comes to the landlord's daughter, and at the window at night. But
that kind of set the Britt Ekland character up much more as a teacher and a goddess. And in terms of female politics, that would give her at least a bit more standing rather than just being sexy barmaid, which is otherwise what she essentially is. But I don't think you could really call it a matriarchy.
No, it's really interesting. That whole scene is brilliantly done, though, the way it kind of builds and montages back and forth. And again, Edward Woodward's performance of this like struggling, repressed man, because obviously you can tell all throughout the movie he is being very, very tempted by all of these. He's very conflicted, isn't he, by his kind of outrage / arousal by everything going on around him on this island.
Well, those snails are pretty exciting.
Yeah, I know.
But every time he walks around, there's someone basically having sex around every corner. So, it's in the air.
It is. It's so good. And again, that song that she sings is brilliant as well. I listen to the soundtrack all the time.
The soundtrack, wonderful. Definitely, I think it's worth saying to everyone, you could just get the soundtrack and listen to it, because it's a standalone soundtrack, definitely.
Yeah, definitely.
And if you didn't have the soundtrack, I don't think it would be the classic film in a way that it is. It's a crucial element to the film.
It absolutely is. Yeah, it absolutely is.
As you say, it's very upbeat and it's very jolly, and it just gives this different thing. So you think a horror soundtrack is all going to be, something bad is going to happen.
Yes.
Is usually what the soundtrack of a horror film
says.
Yes.
Yes, exactly. Or that kind of Halloween-y, John Carpenter-y, sort of drony, synthy music. This is so different and unique. And what's also interesting about that, that obviously from the get-go, he's there. He's been lured there to be a sacrifice, but they give him absolutely loads of excuses to get out of it in a way. Like they first of all, almost don't let him on the island and sort of send him away, and then they're trying to take his virginity, and it's like they give him all the chances, but it's like he passes every single one of their tests, doesn't he?
Well, the whole film is, or the whole setup of this is to tempt him, isn't it? And also it's a game, to see if he's passed. It is one big test. This is what the film is. You think it's a mystery, but actually it's just we find out in the end that it's just one test, because part of being a correct sacrifice apparently is that he has to be willing, doesn't he?
He has to be willing. He has to be like a kind of king figure, a figure of power, which is what he's in the police. He's the fool because he's been fooled throughout the entire movie, and he's a virgin, so he passes all of the tests. He ticks all the boxes, doesn't he, to be the perfect sacrifice for their apples or whatever it is they want.
Exactly. What's it about again? I don't remember. It's like, and also at the end, you never know if once he has been a sacrifice, will the apple harvest succeed the next year? We never know,
because there's those conversations, aren't there, where he's going, these are not going to bring back your apples, and what do you think's going to happen next year? They're going to sacrifice you, and you can see that slight anger and fear in Christopher Lee's face at that point as well, where he is worried himself. Is this going to work? And like you say, he's got those doubts, hasn't he, himself, about this way of life and these traditions, but they're kind of clutching at anything they can, I suppose. It's really interesting. Let's talk about Christopher Lee then. I mean,
come on, let's get around to Christopher Lee.
Because he is obviously up until this point, he's always been known as Mr. Hammer Horror, Dracula, that kind of thing, and he's always Gone on record to say this is his favourite role he's ever played, his favourite movie that he's been in. Why do you think that is?
Well, he's sensational in this film. I mean, this part was written specifically for him. At this point, he'd done 7 Dracula films, and I think he said that after Dracula AD 7, was it 1972, and the Satanic Rituals of Dracula, he's like, I've had enough.
I'm done.
No more Dracula. And it was just at the point where he started branching out into other things. So in 1970, he made The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes with Billy Wilder.
Yeah.
And for him, he's like, brilliant. I'm working with a brilliant director. I'm on the up. So the fact that he was working, Tony Schaffer came to him and said, I've got this script. And he was very much involved from the get-go about creating this part. And I think, he is sensational in this part, because you think it could be, if it wasn't him, would it make sense? He just has terrific physical presence, for one thing. He has this incredibly deep voice, this huge wiry mop of hair. He's incredibly tall. Yeah. He has definitely that aristocratic feel of being a Lord Summerisle.
He does.
And he manages to work. I think we need to talk about the camp element of this film. It's an incredibly camp film, but it never feels silly. Which is very difficult to pull off. And at the initial scene we had already talked about, when he meets Sergeant Howie in his what I would call it, his stately home, as it were, you can tell from the off he's the one with the power in this island, and he's like, oh, you come to my island, what do you suspect? Foul play? And it's sort of very pantomimey. But then he goes into this long diatribe about how his grandfather had come to the island, and there's a kind of whole intellectual sort of metaphysical discussion that he's going into. And because it's his Christopher Lee, he can pull that off. He can do camp, but he can also do kind of quite intellectual matters as well. And I think that's why he really liked the film as well, because it had a bit more intellectual heft to it, actually.
There were a few more shades to him as well. And even though he's not on screen for a huge amount of time throughout the film, but he conveys everything, like you say, from sort of camp to charming to intellectual to menacing. Exactly, all in one go.
Do sit down, Sergeant. Socks are so much better absorbed with the knees bent. Please.
And
really
you
magnetic.
You have to not know that, he has to be magnetic enough to feel like a cult leader, which is essentially what he is on this island. But also playful, and like all great villains, you want to feel that you slightly feel like you're on his side much more than
exactly.
Howie's.
And again, that was quite a hammer. That was a thing of this era as well, wasn't it? You kind of the monsters, the villains, the whatever. They all had a bit of a twinkle in their eye, I suppose, to an extent. It's interesting because for both Christopher Lee and Vincent Price in Witchfinder General, these two kind of massive icons of horror, and for both of them in these two movies, they're very different roles. To what they're sort of classically known for. Vincent Price in Witchfinder General, really tones it down. He's not got his usual kind of, again, camp kind of villainous role. It was played much more straight and much darker and much more intimidating. And with Christopher Lee, it's a totally different breath of fresh air role for him as well.
It sort of manages. It's amazing how he manages to have a sort of gravitas.
Yes.
Despite as we said, sort of prancing around as he does right at the end. He's just literally hopping around in a big wig and a skirt.
It's brilliant.
And
Even
he
that
manages to be, menacing and full of, gravitas and sort of dignity.
Yeah.
And poise.
Yeah.
Which is kind of extraordinary.
It
and
is
he
brilliant.
raises the whole enterprise. Really.
He does. He really does. And again, funny. He is very funny as well. But it doesn't pull you out of it. Some of his lines are brilliant and hilarious. Even that moment when he's making Sergeant Howie dance when he's dressed as the fool. He's like, "Come on, man,
Use your bladder," he says, because the man has a bladder on a stick that he uses as punch.
And he thinks it's the pub landlord, doesn't he?
Yeah.
He's going, "You've been drinking again, haven't you?" or something. You
Yeah.
know?
Use your bladder. Play the fool. That's what you're here for. I suppose you've been getting drunk at your own bar.
Oh, which I'd love to mention the landlord, actually, because one of the wonderful things about this film is also the peculiar casting, because you've got Britt Ekland sort of shipped in from Sweden, but you've also got Lindsey Kemp, who's this extraordinary experimental dancer and classically trained ballet dancer, who was more surprised than anyone that he was therefore, rather than being employed to be a obese, heterosexual, alcoholic landlord in this film. He's this sort of lithe, very gay dancer.
Yeah.
And he has a very strange... He is like a Mr. Punch character.
Yes.
He's a very unsettling
creepy.
Very creepy. He's sort of a bit child catcher and Chitty Bang Bang.
Absolutely. Who's also played by a dancer, wasn't he? It's that same feel. Yeah.
And you must be the policeman from the mainland. Ah, that's right. Sergeant Howie, West Highland Constabulary. Now, I'm quite obviously not going to get back to the mainland tonight, so I wanted he had a room and a bite of supper I could have. I mean, could you manage that?
Aye, I think that can be arranged. My daughter Willow will show you to your room.
There's kind of incest in the air. Is the landlord's daughter
Definitely.
is he having it off with his daughter?
Yeah.
And yet it sort of carries us along with him. So.
He seemed perfectly happy to be joining in these songs about his daughter and basically pimping his daughter out.
Yes, exactly.
People, doesn't he?
Oh, everyone in the pub's had my daughter. Fantastic.
Yes, exactly, yeah. And again, it's just, I love the way, similar to things like Rosemary's Baby as well, actually, just the tone slowly and gradually gets darker and darker, and it kind of creeps up on you, I think, this movie. For me, as soon as you get to Mayday and like the last sort of act of the film, and suddenly everyone around him is wearing these masks, people are popping out from behind walls, or children kind of looking out of windows in their animal masks, suddenly it starts to become, for me, very creepy. It's like suddenly you get these weird, ghostly almost images of children in windows and all of that kind of thing. It feels like that from that point is when it starts to veer into horror.
Well, it's Halloween, isn't it? I mean, not Halloween as in Mike Myers Halloween, but Halloween as in the festival.
Yeah.
Because it is a festival, and it has all that. Yeah, they all wear these kind of very British-looking animal masks.
Yes.
So they all look like bunnies or they're fish heads, and again, it feels very pagan. It's got all these sort of very homemade feel of all these masks. I mean, anytime you see a child in a mask, I think of the Wicker Man. I mean, I think that's the most sort of superficial thing that one connects style-wise about the Wicker Man as well. The Wicker Man itself, any child that you see in a mask, or any grown-up that you see in a mask, and you see, Wicker Man,
yes.
Wicker Man. Yeah.
It'd be a great fancy dress party theme, wouldn't it, the Wicker Man?
Yeah.
It'd be fun. Good for a Halloween. That's for me is when it starts to become really inherently creepy, and the music kind of goes a little bit more kind of off-key, and everything is a bit more like,
There's a wonderful chase scene where Howie's literally chasing through the town trying to find Rowan Morrison. He thinks has been secreted in some cupboard or hidden in a basement or something. And he wanders around town, and the music has a sort of weird twang, starts coming through, a kind of electric twang, as if it's all going a bit haywire now and everything's going a bit off key.
Yes, it's like the film at that point is saying, okay, yeah, no, something is wrong in this place. Something bad is happening, and all the weird stuff he finds then when he's kind of raiding people's homes, like the weird sort of dolls in a sex position on the bed, and like all these other kind of random things that he comes across. It's brilliant. And then that moment when he goes and has a nap, and then they leave the hand with the sort of burning
hand
candles.
Of glory.
Yes, next to his
he
bed.
wakes up. I mean, that is a bit of an over the top moment where he wakes up and there's this disembodied hand with flames coming out the top, like a sort of candle out of each finger. But I still love it.
It's brilliant. I love it. I love it as well. I love it. So, what about then when we finally get into that last act and we get the reveal and that he's about to be sacrificed? As you say, you've got Christopher Lee in a dress. It all could be quite ridiculous and over the top, but do you think it works?
I think it definitely works because it as you say, it builds slowly.
Yeah.
And it is a sort of carnival-like atmosphere. If you go to any British sort of small town and they have some sort of summer festival, there are definitely elements, when you get the Morris dancers out.
Yeah.
They're quite creepy, aren't they?
Very.
Morris dancers. But yeah, that feeling of, a ritual kind of dance. And I think that the choreography is done so well in this film by Stuart Hopps because it's quite understated. So there's a moment earlier where you have the maypole and the children dancing around the maypole. And they're all kind of just normal children. They're obviously local children. So it's not too slick.
Yes.
They're all sort of different sizes and they're all dancing slightly out of time.
Yes.
In this quite sort of strange way. And in this, you have the procession when it starts with Howie and he's disguised as Punch and they're all walking towards what will eventually be the Wicker Man. And it's a bit ramshackle. It's a bit kind of like everyone's sort of wearing kind of weird, like their normal everyday clothes with things on top.
Yes.
It doesn't feel like it's been styled by a movie department.
No, it's so again, it's so British that, isn't it? It's so British. It is like stumbling into a little small town village fate again, where everything's
gone
a bit
wrong,
homemade. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I think that the thing with it as well, which I liked about the maypole dance, which is one of my other favourite musical bits, when it goes, in the wood there grew a tree.
Yeah.
And I think it taps into that thing that we still have from our childhoods where you have things like Oranges and Lemons, which we sing.
Yeah, exactly.
And at the end of the Oranges and Lemons, because I'd sing it to my children, then it gets to the end of the line of Oranges and Lemons, bells of St. Clements, all that. And the end line is like, here comes a candle to light you to bed, and here comes a chopper to chop off your head. And I'm suddenly like, what am I singing to my children here? But that's the line of it. And that's what you have at the end of this procession. Well, the kind of midpoint of the procession sees them making a kind of pentangle out of swords and standing at shoulder height, and people have to put their head in between this sort of the gap that they created with the swords and stand there and then duck out again.
Yeah.
And everyone's going chop, chop,
it's
chop.
wonderful,
chop.
that moment.
And I think that's almost the more sinister to me actually than the Wicker Man. It's this build up of this procession
It's
and that
brilliant.
moment, like, are they going to chop off the head?
Yeah.
And then they do chop off the head of one of the characters. And then it's revealed it's like a fake head and there's a child underneath because, they're smaller than the level of the neck would be where it's been struck off. And everyone's like,
yeah.
It's this great release. But like with the Oranges and Lemons, it's like, it's this cheery song. And then there's this really dark thing. And that's something that we still sing today.
Exactly. Again, such a British thing that, isn't it? That kind of idea that every nursery rhyme, every fairy tale you read kids when they're little, all of them are actually come from incredibly dark, sinister places from history. It's like Ring a Ring of Roses, isn't that
exactly.
about the
Meant
plague
about the
or
plague,
measles or
pocket
something?
full of posies,
Yeah.
tissue, we all fall down. I.e., we're all dead.
We're all
That's
dead.
why we're falling down.
Look at every single, grim fairy tale and where what they originally were written as, and all these, and again, it's that same feel, isn't it? Of like, yes, this is all fun and it's fun for the kids, but actually, it's not.
For children.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Yeah, I love that. It's a real brilliant like build up of suspense. That moment with the swords, the pentagram of swords, and everything. It's so good.
Oh God! Oh Jesus Christ! Oh my God! Christ!
We get to that moment where we reveal the Wicker Man, and Edward Woodward's performance is so iconic now. Him going Christ, all of that. Again, could be seen as quite camp and over the top, but I think it's incredible, that performance. I mean, what do you think?
I think because he's been so restrained for the rest of the film, that's why it works.
He lets
because he's
go.
been so uptight, literally. And I think he wears a uniform. I think he deliberately wore a uniform that's slightly too tight, the policeman's uniform. And suddenly he's in this sort of sacrificial shift that they've put him in, this big white nightie.
Yeah.
And everything, he's being dragged up the hill. And so, he's just letting it all out.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things. We talked about it with this M.R. James one from the 70s called Whistle and I'll Come to You, which is, again, it stars this very uptight old man, and basically, the last few minutes, nothing particularly outrageously terrifying happens, but because you suddenly see this man unravel and almost become like infant-like in how scared he is, that is what makes the moment so powerful and scary. It's that idea of like British buttoned-upness, everything let go suddenly, and like
catharsis coming as well.
Yeah,
isn't
it is
in a way,
kind of
it's
catharsis.
a kind of release for us, even though it's a terror.
Yes, because it's finally like we understand what's happening now, and
that's a moment of
we
revelation.
can accept that it is now scary.
I humbly entreat thee for the soul of this thy servant Neil Howie, who will today depart from this world. Do not deliver me
into the enemy
So,
lines.
when the movie was first out, I mean, I don't know how, I don't have the sort of figures on me, but I don't know how well did it do sort of critically and commercially?
Oh
Do you
God,
know?
it didn't get a release initially because it was buried by the studio. So what happened was there was the producer of the film. It's very tangled. It's like all these films always have like this incredibly tangled backstory. But the producer got booted off just as the film was being made. There's a terrific producer called Peter Snell who also did Don't Look Now. I mean, he was like a really leading light of British Lion cinema. So they got in a new boss, came in, Michael Dealey. He said, this is one of the worst films ever made. I'm going to bury this film. And instead of which, they thought, they took it to Cannes and Roger Corman saw it. And so he said to Roger Corman, what do you think? Roger Corman said, I think it's pretty good. And he said, what changes do you think you should make? And Roger Corman said, I do XXXXX. So this producer, Michael Dealey, took all those suggestions of Roger Corman, rang up the editor, said, I want you to make these changes by the morning. Did it, cut it down to 84 minutes and decided to release it on a double bill with Don't Look Now. Can you imagine what that double bill would have been like?
Oh my God. Yeah, that is brilliant, isn't it? That the Wicker Man was kind of thought of as the B movie half of that double bill, next to the Nick Rogue's prestigious Don't Look Now. But of course, now we they're both hailed as like basically the two masterpieces of horror,
just too
aren't
much
they?
in Wonderful Pills
Can
suddenly
you
get unleashed in
imagine?
cinemas. But they've never been able to really recreate it because then the original footage of the film was apparently kept and then buried in landfill. Do you know this story?
No, that's very folky,
it's
isn't it?
so folky. So apparently the original, because obviously everything was on celluloid then.
Yeah.
So the original, one of the last surviving whole kind of all the old celluloid bits.
Yeah.
Were in a storage unit, and apparently they just emptied the storage unit, and it was just emptied into landfill, and then they built the M25 on top of it.
Brilliant. Oh my God.
So somewhere under the M25 is a canister or something of film where the original Wicker Man exists buried like a relic.
That's so perfect, isn't it? That is so perfect.
Annoying for the filmmakers, but perfect for the story.
Yes. And so do you prefer the kind of theatrical version that you get now on the DVD to the director's cut? Because obviously you get that director's cut where you can see the seams, can't you? The quality suddenly, drastically diminishes with
Well, I think
those moments.
what I do prefer, as I said, is that I prefer that it to start right on the island, so it's all contained in the island, because I think it really dates it, having it off the island where you're suddenly in early 1970s Britain.
I agree.
And also I think it explains too much about Howie himself.
Yes,
I think it's
don't
better
need it.
that you just find out that he's a Christian. It feels a bit heavy-handed now, having seen the original, that in the first cut you'd see him go to church.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it makes him more sympathetic because he has a fiancée and he smiles at her, so he's a much more kind of slightly sympathetic character. But he kind of gives the ceremony, and it's he's giving the reading at the church, and it's all much more explicit about this is the sacrifice I give of my body and so on like that. And I actually think it's much more subtle not having that. You find out more for yourself. It makes you do a bit more work as an audience member.
Definitely. And you're just given just the right amount of pieces of him, I think, to totally get him as a character, don't you? Yeah, that he's this very good but honourable man, but also, very uptight.
But I think critical responses at the time were pretty mixed. I think some people just said I think it's a quite bad Telegraph review, just saying it's kind of a mess. I can't remember. I've got some of them here.
Yeah, well, you can imagine it's got a kind of ramshackle feel to it, hasn't it? And it's it's not this big glossy Exorcist type movie, is it? That's
It's made by his David director Robin Hardy, who basically he made one more film and then the Wicker Tree.
And then the Wicker Tree.
Yeah, exactly. So he wasn't like a terrific director. I mean, I think it's well directed. I don't think it's badly directed. I think it works. Yeah, that it isn't too polished.
Definitely. Yeah.
But that makes it even more of one off. It's like he made that one sort of film.
It is, yeah. And again, it's that graininess. There's that folkiness even in the celluloid almost. You know what I mean? Like everything about it feels old and grainy and earthy. Even the way it looks, it's amazing.
But even if it hadn't got sort of hacked about and put on this double bill, I think it would, whatever era it would have been, it would have always been a difficult film to market because of this fact that it doesn't fit into a genre slot. And I think anyone seeing it would be like, what? Now we're all like, well, it's the Wicker. And now we'd say it's Wicker Man like, but
of course, yeah.
But
of course.
At the time, it would have been like, what's this? Because people would have gone expecting a horror movie, as they still do, because it's got Christopher Lee in it, and Ingrid Pitt, who are these two huge Hammer horror stars.
Yeah.
And it's not a Hammer horror movie.
It's not at all. Yeah, it's such a strange one, isn't it? And so, we briefly mentioned this at the beginning. Do you see The Wicker Man as a horror movie? What do you think?
I'd say it's not a horror movie. In fact, in which I would be backed up by Edward Woodward, who said, I've never considered The Wicker Man to be a horror film.
Interesting.
So got it from Edward Woodward. Don't just believe me. But I think if you had to categorise it, I guess you'd put it in the horror genre. Well, the folk horror genre we now put it into.
The folk horror genre,
sort of,
exactly. Because there is nothing else. You couldn't categorise it as anything else, really. I don't know what you'd call it if you didn't call it a horror.
I'd stick to my guns and say, it's its own genre. It's a one-off.
It is a totally unique beast, isn't it?
Yeah. And so I think that's the thing. It's, and I think it does capture that kind of particular Britishness. It's almost like an archive of a particular sort of feeling. Like in 100 years' time, I think people would sort of really go back to it.
Yeah, definitely.
There's something buried in the Wicker Man that makes us all go back to it.
Yeah, definitely. And again, like we said at the beginning, people are still trying to capture that magic. You can see how much it influences people like Ben Wheatley, even people like Reece Shearsmith, Mark Gatiss, those types of people. Everyone is trying to kind of bring back that kind of creepy Britishness. And we seem to be, a lot of people are sort of saying at the moment that we're in a bit of a folk horror revival with movies like The Witch and stuff like that. I mean, what are your thoughts on these types of movies? Do you enjoy this kind of new wave of folky horror that we're getting?
I do. I love The Witch, but it has I think because it's American. It has a kind of almost. It's the Blair Witch and The Witch do belong to a different tradition. There's I really enjoy the particular Britishness of British horror and folk horror. I think that's one of the defining things I like about it.
Yeah,
that Britishness.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, because again, there are kind of American spins and international spins on these movies, which we're going to cover. But yeah, I think you're right. They are different. They're not. You can't categorize them as the same kind of thing.
I mean, thinking about it, when I was thinking about other things that are like it, I think it belongs. If it belongs with anything else, it belongs to that particular, eerie British. You mentioned League of Gentlemen, the TV program.
Yes.
I also mentioned something like The Prisoner.
Yes.
And like A Canterbury Tale, the Powell and Pressburger film.
Yeah.
Which has this, it's very peculiar, it's a 1950s film where there's a mysterious character called the Glue Man going around this village who just throws glue on women's hair, and you never it's just, there's something kind of weird going on. And that was made by people who, are outsiders of the system. I think, just because I'm calling it Britishness, it doesn't mean it's necessarily made by British people.
No, but it somehow gets that Britishness
right.
And
often if you're an outsider, you can kind of tap into that because it's sort of something that lots of British people now feel out of touch with.
Yeah.
But there's something in it that obviously is part of the soil and part of the magic with a K at the end that infiltrates. That's still in the soil, it's still churning away. Yeah,
it's a hard thing to define, isn't it? It's funny because actually I was reading somebody write about American Werewolf in London and actually saying, for an American director, John Landis managed to capture Britishness in that film more than a lot of British filmmakers. Yeah. He somehow gets it so right, not just the depiction of the North at the beginning, but also London and real London and Soho and all of that kind of element to it as well.
Maybe because you see it anew or you see it from different eyes,
Yeah, it's really interesting.
In the woods there grew a tree, and a fine, fine tree was he.
And on that tree there was a limb, and on that limb there was a...
Brilliant. And so do you think it's 45 years old now? Do you think it still holds up today, The Wicker Man?
Yeah, I think it definitely still holds up today because it doesn't date, because it is timeless. It's set in this timeless zone, so it's going to date a lot less than almost every other horror around it. And because of its use of location, so it doesn't have that kind of, we're in a studio with sort of dodgy lights and peculiar makeup and everything like that.
Yes.
And because it used locals who were authentic. So again, it doesn't have the wardrobe department kind of giving their stylized version of something. It comes from reality.
Yes, exactly. Scarily authentic, definitely. Wonderful. So I was going to ask you, usually ask at the end what your favourite horror movie is. You've already mentioned, so it is The Wicker Man.
I think,
yeah.
Except it's not a horror movie.
Except it's not a horror movie. What would you say is your scariest ever movie then? Can you remember what your kind of scariest movie experience has been?
I think, everyone says The Shining, don't they, is their scariest movie. But I do have a Shining. I think my most frustrating thing, actually, and one of my biggest frustrations in life is associated with The Shining, that my mother was almost in The Shining.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so my mother was almost the woman who... She was actually cast as the woman who gets out of the bath naked. And
oh, my God. That's
my mother's
incredible.
A model, and so she went and she had an audition with Stanley Kubrick on the set of the Overlook Hotel.
Oh my God.
And she got the part, and then my father refused to let her do it because she had to be naked. So he was like, apparently he said, just think what your children will think of you in the future. And I'm like, you could have been the one in The Shining is what I'm thinking.
She could have been now appearing in, Ready Player One.
Exactly. Now it's all come back again. So.
Oh my God. That's amazing. What an amazing story. Oh, wow. I mean, it might have been a bit weird for you growing up watching that.
But
it might
now,
have taken something away from the power of that movie.
It would have been a bit distracting in that scene.
In that moment, which is arguably one of the scariest set pieces. That might have been slightly ruined for you, but that's very cool that she nearly ended up in that. Wow.
But I think the scariest movie I've seen recently is Hereditary.
Yes.
There are very few films that I actually have nightmares about. I definitely had a nightmare after seeing that film, and I definitely had that. There's something behind that cupboard feeling.
I think yes, absolutely, and I think also it's like what we said about The Wicker Man, a little bit The Shining as well. These movies where you don't really actually know what this film is that you're watching. Like you don't know where it belongs and where it's going, what the tone is, what the story is. That's the thing I got with Hereditary, because it's very different. What we were discussing, it's very different to what the trailer might suggest, and it's like what you said with what people probably thought when they first saw The Wicker Man, when they're like, this isn't what I was expecting. And it's probably the same with Psycho as well, with what happened to Janet Leigh, where it's like suddenly the audience are put in this position where it's like, I have no idea what the fuck I'm watching, like that's what I felt watching Hereditary. Like, what is this film, where is it taking me, kind of a thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't even know what I was expecting to find behind the cupboard.
Yes, exactly.
It wasn't I was expecting like the nun or something to jump out. It's like I don't even know what there's just fear is what's behind that cupboard. I'm not even sure what shape it is, which makes it even more scary.
Oh God, yeah. Toni Collette. But do you think Toni Collette has got any chance of getting an Oscar nomination? Because I know it's a horror movie and it's very early on in the year, but
I think it depends on the competition, and I think there's increasingly really good parts for women out there. So give it 5 years ago, then yes. But then I suppose horror movies weren't.
Yes, but now post Get Out, that this could happen this time, and it is getting so much critical acclaim, but getting very bad audience feedback. Apparently, it's got like in America, the audience, whatever it's called, the score thing, it's got like a D- or something.
Oh really? Because people are going, you said this was the scariest movie ever. This isn't like Final Destination where all my jump scares.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not that kind of A Quiet Place type of a scary movie, is it? It's something very different to that.
I was thinking also about the things that I found most scary on screen would probably be. Actually, I remember when I was growing up watching the Joan Hickson Miss Marples, and there'd often be like a weird moment in that. Like there was a film called Pocket Full of Rye, which of course plays into this folk horror, and it was based on this book, and all the deaths are linked to the song, Sing a Song of Sixpence, Pocket Full of Rye, and they're all. And there was one about, and then it's 420 blackbirds baked in a pie, and there was one. The king is in his counting house, counting his money. The queen is in the garden eating bread. The maid is in the garden hanging out the clothes, and along came a blackbird and pecked off her nose. Lovely, another lovely cheery line from a children's.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Children's rhyme. But there was a scene where it had the maid hung out. She'd been killed and strung up on the clothesline and like all green because she'd been left out there overnight with the clothes pegs on her nose.
This sounds brilliant.
I know, but like I think that's the thing about The Wicker Man to me, because it has that Britishness, which is obviously Agatha Christie, Joan Hicks. You can't get much more British actually than a BBC adaptation of Miss Marple or whatever it was.
Definitely.
And it's happening in a domestic situation.
Yes.
And often when we see horror films, they're an American sort of situation, and you can tell that it's not our house, isn't it? Like Amityville Horror, it's in one of those weird houses out in the country, and that's scary. And we all have houses like that, but they're often in that particular sort of gothic suburban house where it's something in an English country garden where that's happened.
Yeah, something so British.
More, something's wrong. I mean, you go into the garden and it's like, this is a horror that should not be in this lovely little rural setting.
Absolutely. It's so funny, the amount of people I've asked who, they always say the things that scared them most were TV, BBC things growing up, like I said, like those kind of BBC ghost stories for Christmas through the 70s, or all these other kind of programs that used to have Armchair Thriller or whatever it's called, and Chiller, and all these types of... It feels like we don't get that so much anymore, which is a shame. But,
that's the thing with TV is also because it kind of invades your domestic setting, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Home invasion of
TV. Definitely. Do you find films scarier watching them in a cinema or at home?
I think it depends on how black it is. Ideally, you want it as dark as possible, and sometimes you can be sitting in your living room and not have that. But yeah, if I'm watching something alone in the dark, and you've watched it, and suddenly
it's a more powerful experience sometimes.
Suddenly you have to get up and brush your teeth. And
yes.
Go, but I have to go across the dark room to get there.
Yeah, exactly. Creaky floorboards and that kind of thing. Yeah, definitely. Brilliant. Thank you so much for joining me.
My goodness, I can't think of a better way to spend my time than enthusing about my favourite films. So
It's wonderful. It's been absolutely brilliant. If people want to find you and just find you on social media and stuff you've written and that kind of thing, where can they find you?
Probably Twitter, Larushka _IZ.
Brilliant. Lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and a huge thank you to my brilliant guest, Larushka. It was so brilliant to have Larushka finally on the podcast for the first time, and I hope she will be back again very, very soon. If you want to catch Larushka on the radio or you want to read anything that she's written, please do follow her on social media. Her details will be in the show notes. So what did you think of this week's show, and what do you think of The Wicker Man? Obviously, me and Larushka, we're pretty big fans. Spent that last hour gushing. Do you agree with us? Do you feel the same way? Get in touch. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter @evolutionpod or on Facebook. That's facebook.com/evolutionofhorror. And don't forget, there is also a discussion group. That's where you can discuss the movie, the horror genre, folk horror, anything you like really, with other fellow listeners. It's a really great group full of lovely, intelligent, friendly people, and it's growing every day. So please come and join. That's the Evolution of Horror discussion group, and that can be found on Facebook. Now, don't forget, you can find us on all major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Stitcher, Podbean, Libsyn, and many, many others. And if you get a chance, please do hit that subscribe button. And also, if you get a minute, leave a little rating or review, ideally a 5-star one. It just gives the podcast a boost when it comes to algorithms and that kind of thing, and it helps us get discovered by new listeners. So, next week, well, we've now done the entire Unholy Trinity, the 3 movies that gave folk horror its name. So where to go from there? Well, next week we're going to be branching away from film and into television. I'm going to be joined by writer Tom Burgess. He writes graphic novels that all belong in the kind of folk and ghost genre, and he's going to be giving me some of his personal recommendations and favourite picks when it comes to TV folk horror, not just from the 1970s but all the way through to present day. So next week we're going to be covering multiple titles. We won't be talking about any of them in spoilerific detail, so don't feel like you have to go away and watch about 18 box sets between now and next week. We're just going to be giving some recommendations for some of these quite obscure 1970s British folk horror TV shows, such as Children of the Stone, The Owl Service, Pender's Fen, and Robin Redbreast. But then we're going to be going all the way through to modern day TV shows which also dabble in folk horror, such as Hannibal, League of Gentlemen, Inside Number 9, the Roanoke series of American Horror Story, and the first season of True Detective. And of course, it wouldn't be this podcast without us mentioning briefly M.R. James and the BBC Ghost Stories for Christmas. There are quite a few of them that lean more towards folk than ghosts, so we're going to be covering a couple of those briefly as well. So loads of really interesting, meaty stuff to discuss next week. So join me then for all of this and more on the Evolution of Horror.